Welcome to Ohio Roots, the official podcast of the Ohio Genealogical Society. Join us as we embark on a captivating journey through Ohio's rich genealogy, history, and abundant resources. Hosted by me, OGS Executive Director Noel Poirier, this podcast brings you insightful conversations with a diverse array of guests, from OGS members, chapter leaders, and staff to renowned genealogists, historians, and influential figures within the genealogical community. Each episode delves into fascinating topics and captivating stories. So grab your headphones, hit that play button, and join us on this enthralling journey of Ohio's roots. This episode of the OGS Ohio Roots podcast, we're joined by Richard Schneider, Family Search Coordinator at the John Parker Library at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center in Cincinnati, Ohio. Richard works with researchers and patrons navigating some of the most challenging and meaningful questions in genealogy, especially for families tracing African American ancestors. In this conversation, we'll talk about the records that survive, the stories that don't, and why this work matters so deeply today. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Richard Schneider. Well, Richard Schneider, thank you so much for joining me today for the OGS Ohio Roots podcast to talk about the John Parker Library at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. I appreciate you being here. That's a mouthful, by the way.
It is.
I want to start with kind of how you ended up where you are in your career path. Let's start with that so folks get to know you a little bit.
Oh, my. My career path?
Yeah, well, whatever we want to call it. A winding path?
I really was a teacher. I taught Spanish and English as a second language for like 38 years. So that was my career path. But genealogy, I started when I was about 19 years old.
Okay.
And developed a passion for that. And then I was asked to work at the Family Search Center in my church in Cincinnati. And I did that for a number of years as a consultant. And then when I retired in 2017, I wanted to work at the Freedom Center because I had a friend working there and I knew of the wonderful experiences they were having. And I started working there. And then in 2021, I was asked to be the director.
Okay. Well, for our listeners who don't know about the John Parker Library, can you briefly describe the role the library plays in the mission of the overall Freedom Center?
Yes. The John Parker Library, and particularly the family search aspect of it, the genealogy aspect, began when the museum opened in 2005. It's very interesting how that happened. There had been some racial tension in Cincinnati in the late 80s. The Klan had put a cross up on Fountain Square, the main square in Cincinnati, and then Marge Schatz, who was the owner of the Reds, had made some racial statements about some of her players. And there was just a very bad image that was coming out of Cincinnati at that time. And some of the leaders in the community wanted to change that image. And they said, we need something to let people know that Cincinnati is better than this. And that's how the Freedom Center began. They were thinking of that, and they thought of our proximity to the Ohio River and the part that that area played in the Underground Railroad. And the museum was conceived that way. And at the same time as the building was finally being constructed in the late 1990s, maybe early 2000s, it opened in 2004. The CEO, who was going to be in charge of the Freedom Center, felt like it would help if African Americans could trace their lineage, if they could make connections with family, that would do so much to help those who had lost their identity because of slavery. And about the same time, there was a man from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who worked in downtown Cincinnati, was passing this building in its construction, and he thought, we need to have a genealogy library there. And he had some friends in Procter & Gamble, and the CEO at that time of the Freedom Center was also from Procter & Gamble. He approached them. They said, oh, this is just what we're looking for. And so when the museum opened in August 2004, the Family Search Library, or the John Parker Library, was part of that.
So, explain to me what kind of resources are available there for folks. What separates the John Parker Library from just any other library folks would visit?
Uh, to be quite honest, right now, what sets it apart is that we focus on African American genealogy. And we have honestly the same resources online as any other family search library, but our staff has researched African American genealogy for years. We have staff members who were there when the museum opened. And 99% of our patrons are African American. So we get plenty of practice researching family history for African Americans.
What are some of the unique challenges to that for those folks who don't do genealogy research?
Oh my goodness. Well, we, those of us who do not have African American ancestry, as far as we know, usually have no problem going back quite a few generations. I was looking at mine this morning and I was going back 12 generations, 13 generations to Europe, to Germany, and so forth. An African American is fortunate if they can go back before 1870. And that is because the 1870 census was the first census in the United States in which previously enslaved people were listed as individuals with names instead of being listed as property to slave owners. So they can go back, if they can go back to that, they're doing well. Now, there are some, I've been surprised, there are some who had freed blacks in their background. The first time I discovered this, I was just blown away. There was a family, and they were living in North Carolina in 1850, and they were freed blacks. And this is North Carolina. And they had their own farm. And I said, well, my goodness, how did that happen? And I did some research, and I discovered that there are more freed blacks living in the South when the Civil War broke out than in the North. So you do find exceptions to that. But even finding that exception, you might go back to when they came here as a slave, if you're fortunate enough to be able to do that. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. Well, then you have the Middle Passage, that time period between when they were taken from Africa and brought to this country, and there's hardly anyone that can go back to that. Their identity is lost in that time period, and we can go back so much farther. So that is a big brick wall that we have. The other problem we have is because of the socioeconomic situation of many African Americans who, because of a lot of it goes back to slavery and the laws and the biases that had developed, many of them have difficulty going back even to their grandfathers or their great grandparents. One, there are just so many interesting aspects there. And then the other part of that too is that the story I get from my African American patrons time and time again is that their parents or their grandparents didn't talk about these things. It was too painful. So they didn't want to bring it up. So a lot of that history is lost, and they didn't know who their ancestors were. Then you have records that have been falsified. I was just recently helping a woman, and we were looking for her great grandfather, and I found a death certificate. And I said, oh, here's your great grandfather's death certificate. And I pulled it up. No, I was wrong. His name was on it as a parent. It was her grandfather's death certificate. And I said, well, now, Novella, it looks like that he died of a cerebral hemorrhage. And they said it was caused by influenza. And she looked at me and she said, he was lynched. Well, I guess that cerebral hemorrhage was a result of being lynched. But I said, look how the records have been changed to cover that up. And then we did find her great-grandfather's record, and he was fortunate enough to be in the 1790 census. So all that history just in that one little search.
Hi, everyone. Noel Poirier here, Executive Director of the Ohio Genealogical Society and your host for the Ohio Roots podcast. Did you know you can help preserve the past and empower the future? Your donation to the Ohio Genealogical Society helps protect vital family history records and supports research for generations to come. Visit www.ogs.org/donate and give today. Thank you so much for your support. Get ready for the 2025 OGS Annual Conference coming to Sharonville, Ohio, April 29th through May 2nd, 2026. Join genealogists and family historians from across the country for 4 days of inspiring sessions, expert speakers, research tools, and community connections. Don't miss your chance to discover new stories and strengthen your family history skills. Registration opens November 28th, so be sure to register and be part of Ohio's premier genealogy event. When you're working with the subject matter that you're working with, you're uncovering some kind of really deeply personal histories of people. How do you see, when you sit down with a client like that, these events and what they learn about their family must have significant effects on them.
Oh my!
I mean, so how do you manage that gracefully? And manage that respectfully and understand it. From a standpoint of not being an African American person,
Yes.
not having lived that life.
Yes. They handle the history much better than we do. There's a lot of tears. We have people who work down at the main desk of the library on the first floor, and they'll say, "Well, what did you do up there today? We had more people coming down crying again." It's tears of joy. They're just excited to find anything there. And the response I get from them is, well, it's history. It's history. And, and there I am sitting there. I'm white. I have ancestry that goes back to Alabama and South Carolina and some slaveholders there. So I feel a certain degree of guilt, maybe not that I can control anything there, but I'm thinking, oh my goodness, my ancestors helped contribute to this situation. But most African Americans that I do research for, of course, maybe it's because it's a museum. It attracts people who are interested in education and learning about freedom and wanting to learn more. They know the history, basically. And they accept it. It is, of course, no unusual thing to find white lineage in the background because of the nature of slavery. And most African Americans just accept that. They say, well, yeah, she was raped by the slave owner, and we do have white ancestry there, and they embrace that. They want to trace it. They do much better with that than white people do when they find out that they have Black people in their background. So, in fact, a story about that with DNA. One of my volunteers is a man named Sami Mohammed. Okay, and Sami grew up in Cleveland, went to Vietnam, and when he came back, he converted to Islam and then moved to Cincinnati. Sami loves DNA. I mean, he has relatives spitting in the tubes and doing the kits for him all the time. And he got a phone call. No, it was an email. No, it was a phone call from a woman. And she said, we are related according to DNA. And he talked with her for a while. And I think he discovered it was his great-grandmother or great-great-grandmother, one or the other. And she said, well, I just think it's wrong. And he said, well, how can you say that DNA is wrong? She said, well, if you don't mind, she said, you sound Black to me on the phone. And he said, well, I am. She said, well, I'm not. And we don't have any Black ancestry. He said, you do now. And she said, no, I just don't see how that's possible. He said, DNA doesn't lie. And, the lady cut off contact with him. That was so disturbing to her. But I've had people come in. We had one lady come in one day, and we found her great-great-grandmother, and she was white and had blue eyes, according to the information we found. And this lady sat there and laughed and laughed. And she said, oh, I'm so relieved. I couldn't figure out where my grandson got his blue eyes.
You bring up DNA, and I was one of my thoughts was, particularly for African American genealogy, what are the alternative sources and strategies that you suggest to folks when the paper records don't help them anymore?
Well, DNA is one. And of course, we tell them, number one, in any genealogy, as you know, talk with your oldest living relatives. Get as much information as you can while they're still here and have their full faculties. Because I tell them, dates are not important. Not as important. Well, they are important, but not as important as names and places. We can always estimate the date, but we need names and places. And if that doesn't help, we say, well, do your DNA and let's hope that you have relatives who have also done their DNA. And in addition to that, as you well know, DNA does you no good unless they put their tree up for public access, not private, but public access, so that you can tie in and see who's related. And so we encourage them, I encourage them to go to Family Search because it's free. And Ancestry, is costly for many of us. But I encourage them to start a tree on Family Search because I tell them I've had all kinds of help come in on Family Search. I had a great grandfather who came here from Germany, and I couldn't make the link to Europe because too many people had the same name. And my cousin was working on it also, and she contacted me. She said, I was just reached out to by a professional genealogist in Germany who knows our link to Europe. And there were 2 books that had all my ancestors in it back to the 1500s. I would have never found that on my own. So I encourage people to put their trees up so that they're accessed by others. About 4 years ago, through Family Search, a picture came up of my great-great-grandfather. I had no idea what he looked like, but I would have never found that otherwise. So there's lots of advantages to being public about it, which kind of goes against the grain
Sure.
of grandparents and great-grandparents who tried to keep things private and didn't want to talk about it. But that's the only way you're going to make links sometimes.
So if somebody wants to plan a visit to the library at the Freedom Center, how do they go about doing that? Is that something they can just kind of walk in and do, or do they make an appointment?
Well, we say by appointment only. We've said that from the time we opened. Most of our people are walk-ins. We give priority to people who make appointments, but the vast majority are walk-ins, and they're welcome to come in. In fact, if they come in just to do genealogy, they don't have to pay the museum admittance fee. They just tell them we're going up to do genealogy on the 4th floor. Um, there's a phone number they can call that links them directly to us, and we can set up an appointment if they want to do that. The Freedom Center also has a web page and a link there that they can contact us by email also.
If somebody's going to prepare for this appointment, what would you like them to do to prepare before they come to see you?
Oh my goodness. At least know the names of the people. We've had people come in who, and it's particularly difficult if you have a common name like Jones or Brown, and that's all they know, and they don't know where they lived. Names and places. If you can get an estimate for a date, that helps too. But fill in what you know. There's charts online that they can access through our webpage, through the Freedom Center, just a pedigree chart, with the tree. Just fill in what you know, and we tell them, try to find someone who was alive during the 1950 census, because that's where we really begin the research, is with the census. That's where we can identify them and know we have the correct family. And so the 1950 census being the latest census available to us, we say try to find someone in your line who was alive during the 1950 census. We prefer working with someone who is deceased because their records are more accessible than for the living. And just bring us what you have, but get as much information as you can. You don't need to know everything. but maybe focus on one in particular, but have several in mind, and bring that in. And then they sit down with us, and we go to work.
I can tell just by chatting to you that you get very excited helping people. So, what do you see? What's exciting to you about the future research for African American genealogy?
Oh, AI.
In what way?
I have seen demonstrations where AI has gone through plantation records, 60 pages of plantation records in less than a minute, and had names and dates and everything organized. We are finding more and more records available to us online that I'm sure AI has done. Just recently, in fact, about 3 weeks ago, one of my volunteers is working with a woman, and I was there in the room when it happened. And he said, "Come over and look at this. I've never seen this before." And it was a mortality schedule from Georgia for a slave baby that had died. Now, who would have ever thought that they would even care to record something like that? And they had the baby's first name. And I can't remember, he may have been 2 years old when he passed. But here he was in the Georgia mortality schedule. And I'm sure AI must have uncovered that recently. And the lady looked at us, she said, "Oh my goodness." And it was 1850. And the lady said, "We have this name in our family and we never knew where it came from." And this is the furthest back that we could go on her line where that name existed.
That's amazing, and I share your excitement about AI, along with with all of our concerns about it as well. But it is doing exciting work in genealogy. Well, Richard Schneider from the John Parker Library at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, thank you so much for joining me today on the Ohio Roots podcast. It was a real pleasure, and I hope some of our listeners get down there to visit you.
Thank you so much.
I want to thank Richard Schneider of the John Parker Library at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center for helping us better understand the challenges and the power of researching family histories shaped by slavery and the search for freedom. These stories remind us that genealogy isn't just about records, but about resilience, movement, and memory. If today's conversation sparked questions about your own family's past, we encourage you to keep digging, keep asking, and keep listening. Thank you, as always, for listening to the OGS Ohio Roots podcast. If you enjoy listening to the Ohio Roots podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could go to whatever platform it is that you listen and give us a good review. Reviews help us get more listeners and reach more people with Ohio Roots and what we're trying to do with the Ohio Genealogical Society. So please, leave us a nice review, and thanks for listening.
The Ohio Roots podcast is brought to you by the Ohio Genealogical Society, the premier gateway for discovering your Ohio family history. Hosted by OGS Executive Director Mill Poyer and edited by Luke Poyer. Theme song is Beautiful Ohio, recorded by Bob Stanley and his orchestra in 1944. To learn more about joining the Ohio Genealogical Society, visit www.ogs.org.